Hello and welcome to Seconds Out Live. I'm Danny Flexen, delighted to be back after an absence last week, and also because no one else was available this week, apparently, to join Ayman Khan. No slur against Ayman. Good to see you, Ayman. How are you?
I'm good, Danny. Great to have you back in the hot seat as well. I feel like, look, no disrespect to anyone in the team, but it's just not quite the same when it's not you on the opposite end of the corner. Do you prefer the red or the blue corner, Danny? Which one do you like? It's the blue corner, right?
Well, I'm a red generally, aren't I, with Liverpool and so on, but I don't know. I mean, is blue usually the away corner?
Well, the screen's looking a bit blue, so I thought maybe you're feeling the Monday blues.
Yeah, I think it might just be the way this room's decorated. And also, I haven't got a lot of natural light coming in. I'm a bit of a vampire today, I guess. But yeah, so for people out there who were a bit confused, bemused, perplexed by the thumbnail and the title for this week's episode, Ayman picked it. That's not the only point. Anthony Joshua, actually, I picked the headline, so it's not quite right. But yeah, Anthony Joshua against Jake Paul is a fight that's been genuinely discussed over the last week or so, after Eddie Hearn revealed that AJ won't be in any shape to get back in the gym for 8 weeks after picking up a minor injury. And now thoughts turn to his next fight. And Jake Paul has made some widely publicized comments saying AJ's got no chin and no skill. Not sure quite what that makes Jake Paul in comparison, but I'm sure we'll get into that. And he'd like to fight him in 2026. Eddie Hearn didn't seem entirely sure if the dateline was right, but he said they'd certainly entertain it. He said he'd spoken to AJ. He'll entertain it. I mean, why wouldn't he? Massive commercial opportunity for very limited risk, if any risk. Ayman, before we go to the chat for the first time, what was your initial reaction to this fight being mooted?
Yeah, I sort of half thought I'd read the headline wrong, but then as I started to read all the bits about it and kind of put all the pieces of the context of the Jake Paul puzzle together, having been close to it, seems the Canelo Alvarez fight, you just knew that Jake, needing an opponent, wanted something big. And in the context of his career, I feel like some of these YouTubers turned fighters are looking for that one big cash out fight or those big fights, those big money spinning nights. And it's a really difficult task to go higher up the ladder than when your last fight or exhibition or whatever it is, your last event involved Mike Tyson. And with respect to Anthony Joshua, I do think it is a step down, but it's not too far of a step down in terms of course, well, it's an even bigger step up in terms of competition, if it is actual competition, but it's not too far of a step down in terms of star power. On the world scene, it is a bigger one for sure. You have to kind of accept that because of the draw that Mike Tyson is, but you need someone who's big in the scene. Maybe you need to build up your credibility. Maybe you need to aim high if your motivations are a little bit low after having such a big money spinning event. So I got it. I got that. You know, Canelo Alvarez isn't in the picture for him, so you got to look for someone else. And Tyson Fury and Garner might be one of those guys. Anthony Joshua, you start looking at those names and you try and pick one out and try to lure one in. And Anthony Joshua said he's a fighter, but he's also a businessman. And a fight with Jake Paul makes business sense.
All right, we'll go to the chat for the first time, just for people who haven't tuned in before. We are the most interactive show on Boxing YouTube. So please do give us your likes, your subscribes, your thumbs up. Oh, that's the same as a like. Your comments and your questions, and we'll get through as many as we can. Cloud Strife says, Better Call Paul is great, by the way. I love that series. Of course, Better Call Saul, which, yes, I love it too. Roland Curtis off Vermont Avenue says, look what Daniel Dynamite Dubois did to your boy. Now he's fighting YouTubers. All Day, Everyday Boxing says, is Radio Raheem? That's it. Is Radio Raheem? Not all radios are Raheems, and not all Raheems are radios. That's probably the best answer I can give you. Stats Killer says, good fight for sure. Mr. Extract 81 is giving us his Chinese order. I'm not sure why. Martin Mulligan, Eminem, says, afternoon, Danny and Ayman. Looking forward to the show. I Love Spice says, what's the point of the fight? I imagine the amount of money it would generate would be one of them. Stats Killer goes on. Jake Paul will have an all-time great resume. He has already dominated Mike Tyson. AJ will be next. GOAT discussion soon. Paul says the Chinese order sounds 100. Sam Coombs says, Curtis, good night, good day, good night, good. You guys are doing well. Love, love, bye. Thanks for that, Sam. Big Chungus says Flexi McDanny is back. I mean, it doesn't roll off the tongue, Big Chungus, but I'll take
McDanny.
it. Yeah.
Terrible.
Eminem says, never seen a Jake Paul fight. Am I the only one? Well, statistically speaking, you can't be. But yeah, I mean, I've seen a Jake Paul fight, much to my chagrin. MB says, I'll tune in to see Jake Paul rendered unconscious, but the fight annoys me. Doesn't annoy me in the slightest, to be honest. I'll probably watch it if it happens. I don't think AJ is going to win a world title for a third time. I mean, maybe if he gets the WBA shot against Pulev and everyone decides to start counting that, even though they haven't before. But I can't see him defeating Usyk if they fight another 10 times. Not sure he could beat Dubois in a rematch. Joseph Parker in a rematch, I'd probably still go Parker as the favourite. So AJ's kind of on the outside looking in a little bit, but because he's such a huge commercial draw, he'll always get opportunities. And I think Jake Paul is doing the right thing. He's just narrowly missed out on that Canelo fight when Canelo signed with Riyadh season. So Jake will be thinking, look, there's a great opportunity for me here to get a big name in the ring. You know, Canelo was this close to accepting the challenge, whatever degree of challenge it might be. Now, who's the second biggest cash cow in boxing after Canelo? Well, it's AJ. Arguably a few years ago, he might have been the first. So, and with Tyson Fury retired, there's no dispute that he's now second. So Jake Paul probably thinks, well, that's my next big money opportunity. Yes, it comes with greater risk in terms of, getting some serious damage compared to Canelo. However, no one expected him to win against Canelo. No one expects him to win against this. From his point of view, the motivation and the fact that he thinks it's a realistic goal is pretty clear. With AJ, it means people will stop taking him seriously as a heavyweight contender if he fights a YouTuber. But does he care? I think at this stage of his career, looking to build a legacy, Joshua's more bothered about the event aspect, fighting Jake Paul in a huge event, fighting Martin McCauley in Africa and all that kind of stuff. I think they're the things that people might talk about when he's retired. In terms of the in-ring accomplishments, he's already a two-time world heavyweight champion, unified the belt, Olympic gold medalist in the home Olympics. There's not much more he can add to it apart from becoming three-time. And if he takes a little detour along Jake Paul Avenue and, assuming nothing crazy happens, that opportunity may still be there for him afterwards. And he'll be an even greater, more wealthy attraction at the time. So I was waiting for Ayman to come in there, and he hasn't. So I'll just carry on talking. I'll go back to the chat.
Oh, sorry, Danny. I apologise. I didn't realise it was a.
Mate, there's a few chats since.
Go for
it. All day, everyday boxing says, "Don't make business sense for the public. We won't pay." I don't think you're right about that. I think Anthony Joshua fighting hugely, hugely popular in terms of the numbers, influencer. And the chance that Jake Paul could get absolutely splattered as well. I'm sure a lot of people will be watching for that reason. Beautiful Golden Dragon says, glad you're back, great dad guy. Can Capote ever get Des from Boxing Asylum on? That guy seems like a legend. Is he a former boxer, Ayman?
I don't think he was a former pro boxer, but I think Des had some amateur fights, I believe, or at least trained at the Repton. I don't want to, this is off the top of my head, remember it, so I don't want to I don't want to place fiction into fact, but I'm sure Des did have a bit of a background in that. Sure, people want Des on as long as Danny's happy. We'd have anyone on, I guess, really.
Steady.
No reason not to, I guess.
Good stuff. David Hyde, Daddy Dave, say it again. Nice piece on LBC, Danny, about the late great George Foreman. He was one hard man. Made a great grill too. Yeah, for people that missed it, which is probably all of you, except Daddy Dave, I was on LBC to talk about the career and life of George Foreman over the weekend after his passing, which we'll be discussing later, don't worry. And yeah, it was good. It was a good experience. I was a bit annoyed it wasn't like Nick Ferrari or one of the kind of celebrity hosts that they have on LBC, and they didn't ask me about my views on, right-wing politics or anything like that. But maybe next time, I'm sure I'm going to be invited back. Cloud Strife says Jake Paul is like the herpes of boxing. Nice. Cloud Strife, can I just ask, who's the gonorrhea? Porter says, yeah, AJ is too old now. Father time waits for no one. The toll on the body over the years won't see him win another world title. I love Spice. Not an admission from me, but someone's handle. Says, love to see Jake Paul versus Daniel Dubois. Cuss's System, hi Dennis, says, confusion, who is training AJ? Is it Anthony Chill Wilson or Ben Davison? Hence maybe now saying he's injured. Yeah, because Joshua has been training in Dubai with Anthony Wilson. But he's done that before in his career. Not always when he's not had a head trainer. So as far as we're aware, there's no announcement been made that he's left Ben Davison just yet. Beautiful Golden Dragon says, Des #1. Thanks, Ayman. Next week, question mark. We'll see. We'll see. Big Chunga says, I was great on LBC Flexo. Did you actually listen to it, Big Chunga? Tell us something about it to prove that you actually heard it. All Day, Everyday Boxing says, real boxing fans won't pay. It's shit. I think there's enough casual boxing fans that it doesn't matter. IQ Boxing Academy, Zav Miller says, afternoon, guys. Looking forward to the show. We've already started, Zav. I mean, you were late. But it's fine. It's fine. You can always watch the rest on playback. I don't know how much you've missed. So where were we? So yeah, Ayman, Anthony Joshua, Jake Paul talking about their different motivations. On a kind of percentage scale, how realistic do you think this fight is to happen before the end of 2026?
Oh, difficult to say. I think on the information that we have right now, I think probably like I'm going to give a weird number here, 30% chance happening. I think I need a little bit more details on it and a bit more details as to the conversation they had, because I believe Jake Paul posted a screenshot of them on the phone agreeing to maybe something in 2026. And see where Joshua is. I mean, Joshua stated that this year he wanted to have the potential of having a world title fight or Tyson Fury. Tyson Fury doesn't seem to be happening. World title fight, he seems to be frozen out of the picture. So what is Joshua doing this year? What is he waiting on? What is he unfortunately injured, taking him out of a fight from, was it Martin Bakoli? What was in the picture for him? We don't really know. Does he want to do his business in pro boxing and then move on to something outside of it and maybe have like a little bit of a retirement tour in the YouTuber boxing sort of scene? I think because Jake Paul brings a certain amount of viewership and eyes and business, I do think it has legs where it can happen. So I'd never rule it out. I would never say it's pie in the sky type of thing. It's a real brilliant journey that Jake Paul has been on. If you look at it outside of a hardcore boxing lens as to where he's positioned himself in amongst the scene and the faces of boxing who can command and bring in Netflix into the scene with fights. And it seems to be that they're interested in more than just that one-off event in boxing, with the continuation with Katie Taylor and Amanda Serrano again. So I think it really is a possibility. What I would say is I'm concerned about, though, Danny, is I'm concerned that Eddie Hearn's now coming out and saying that Anthony Joshua is injured. And I believe in one of the interviews recently, it might have been IFL or it might have been the Ring interview. Either way, one of the interviews he gave recently, he said he wouldn't give away the details of the injury, but he said that the interview is to do with the top half of his body. Now, my sources say that Anthony Joshua has had, and the reason for his injury pulling him out from the rematch with Daniel Dubois was to do with an injury in the lower half of his body. So if you top up that there's an injury at the lower half of his body and an injury at the top half of his body, is this a sign for Anthony Joshua that like you've got to start getting those last few paydays maybe because the body isn't as sprightly or as young or as healing or as quick as it used to before, and now you've got to look at the exit door of the sport and maximizing as much as you can out of it, because these things start to rack up, and you don't want someone like Anthony Joshua, you wouldn't want to see forced out the sport because they couldn't, rather they left the sport because they could. And I'd hate to see that for Anthony Joshua if that was his fate. But We'll see when he recovers. We'll see how good he recovers from these injuries. I know that his team and himself don't want to really talk about injuries because they don't want to use it for excuses, because no one really cares after the fact if you had this, that, and the other, and they just never really wanted to play the violin in that, and I respect them for that. But it might mean that some of the fights that we wanted to see might not come to fruition because you can't make it.
Okay, so we're going to put a poll out because some of you have already shat all over the potential fight. Anthony Joshua versus Jake Paul, will you pay for it? So not will you watch it on some dodgy stream, would you be willing to pay money for it? Let us know. The first vote's just gone in as a no, so no great shock there. So let's see what happens with that. Bernard H says the gonorrhea would be the Haney's, referring back to Cloud Strife's post, although he has actually replied himself, so it doesn't count until we hear from Cloud Strife. He says, enjoy it. Bernard H, this is enjoying watching my break. Keep it up. Hulusi Ozdemir says, I'm hearing rumors that AJ is going to fight Jake Paul. Was it our headline or our thumbnail that got you going, Hulusi? Porter says, was Sky Nicholson overhyped? She fought no names and already lost the world title. I mean, who in female boxing, especially at Sky's weight, counts as a name? So I'm not sure if she was overhyped. She was a good amateur. You know, she won pretty clearly a lot of her fights. I've got no issue with the amount of hype. Porter, I can't read your next comment, unfortunately, about Sky Nicholson and Eddie Hearn. We'd get in trouble for that. But he also says, what's worse, Jake Paul for boxing or the sport power slap? I mean, I don't think Jake Paul's bad for boxing necessarily. I think it makes it maybe look a bit too accessible and like something anyone can do, and that isn't true for the level of boxing that, you know, the top fighters are at. But I don't think he's necessarily bad for boxing. I think he's probably encouraged some young generation people who follow him to actually try boxing or go down to their local gym. So I'm not fussed about that. Skylar Wicker says it's a huge step down for AJ. Wake up, sir. AJ's on a different level than Paul. He is sea level. Please, sir, find a new job. You are not an analyst. It's an analyst, Skylar. Cloud Strife, thank God. The question we've all waited for them to answer says, gonorrhea is John Fury. I'll let you tell him that. But has been cleared up with a strong course of Usyk antibiotics. What, Usyk biotics? Antibiotics? I'm not sure. Custody system, Dennis. Gareth A. Davis thinks the fight will happen because of money involved and people want to see Jake Paul knocked out. Gad also feels the AJ versus JP leads to a Fury fight. All Day, Everyday Boxing says it won't happen. Spore Clay, don't know how to say that. Jake Paul is world-class boxer, so glad I didn't spend too long trying to work out how to pronounce that. MB says no chance I'll stream it. Paul says I wouldn't pay. I've got the dodgy stick, thank God. Andrew Maguire says depends on the rest of the card. Very good point. Spore Clay, Jake Paul may be the one to beat Usyk. Thunder Road says chat and viewers not in chat, hit the thumbs up. 80 plus watching and only 30 plus likes. Thank you, Thunder Road, taking your usual position in doing this. So Ayman, we've just put the poll out. Will people watch it? Will you watch it? I'm pretty sure you will, but answer for yourself in a minute. Also, exactly how many rounds do you think Jake Paul can last if it happens?
So easy question out of the way. Yes, I would watch it. Big fan of being entertained, and I think it'd be entertaining both the build-up. I think they'd put a huge undercard underneath it as well too. I think it'd be an interesting and eventful occasion. I'd happily watch that fight. How long can Jake Paul last against Anthony Joshua? So this is a little bit funny because myself and a few other media outlets were invited up to the Rotunda in Liverpool the other day, and another prominent reporter in the scene, in the form of, well, maybe not so prominent, he's a little bit of a unheralded reporter in the form of Daniel Gilfillan, said, as we were watching Liam Smith go on the pads with trainer Joe McNally, said, how long do you think you could last in the ring with Liam Smith? And I was like, probably not long, maybe like 30 seconds. And Danny was like going, maybe a little bit longer. And we then watched Liam Smith start whipping shots into the body and combinations in first phases and second phases and more. And then we kind of looked at each other and went, nah. So I would imagine seeing Liam Smith up close and personal and other fighters that I've seen before. I know this is such, Danny, I won't name names here, but I've heard reporters say in the scene, maybe I'll use the word reporters loosely in this occasion, and people in the scene will know who I'm on about here. But I don't want to name names, but I've heard people say that they think they'd last rounds with Gervonta Davis and things like that. It's mad. Some of it, I know, crazy. But anyway, that's a sidebar.
You can text me later who that was.
I will. No problem. Yeah. The truth is, if all things were equal and it was a legitimate fight, then I would say Jake Paul would probably last around, if that. But there's all sorts of rumors abound, all sorts of unconfirmed rumors, of course, that Jake Paul puts into contracts clauses that you can't do this, you can't hurt him there, that sort of thing, that makes it less of a actual competitive fight in the traditional sense and more of an event, more of a, I guess, blockbuster movie set piece of a fight. And if that's the case, then you might still get an eventful fight where AJ might not be able to hit to the head as hard as he would be able to hit to the body, kind of thing. And Jake Paul gets a bit protected and everyone comes out laughing and happy that they made a load of money and no one gets seriously hurt. But the truth of the matter is, if it was a proper fight, I would not be backing Jake Paul by any means to get the victory or to escape out of a round, despite how well he's progressed, I feel, in the sport.
Yeah, so a few people in the chat have picked up on your comments about the contract terms. Lou Brown says, I definitely pay for it. Been waiting for this bozo to get knocked out. Good little comment from Cloud Strife. I shouldn't miss that. He says, dodgy stick. You need to get that looked at, mate. MB says it should really be over the first combination Joshua lands, but you get the feeling AJ will carry him. Daddy David Hyde says, surely it depends on the contract and how hard and when AJ is allowed to hit him. Lou Brown says 2 rounds. MB says the difference here, though, is AJ isn't a B-side like those MMA guys were against Paul. He doesn't need to accept terms. Yeah, but what if it's a case of they'll pay him more if he does accept terms? You know, I mean, it's not going to harm AJ's reputation heavily if Jake Paul goes 2 rounds rather than 1, is it? You know, and he can say, I mean, was Francis Ngannou, was that first round?
It was the second round.
Yeah, so if he can say he's gone longer than Francis Ngannou, that's a feather in Jake Paul's cap, and it doesn't make AJ look terrible. So I wouldn't, rule out any behind-the-scenes machinations. But starting with that fight, the first proper shot that Joshua landed clean knocked Ngannou clean out. And Ngannou's a much bigger man, much stronger man physically than Jake Paul. He might not be a great striker, but then what are we saying about Jake Paul? The only fight he's lost was to a fellow novice. He's not exactly the second coming of Sugar Ray, either of them. So, yeah, I mean, I would hope that Anthony Joshua would, unless Jake Paul's on his toes, grabbing, holding, moving, and I don't know if he's even got the skill to do that. I can't see it. If AJ's got the right attitude, I can't see it going longer than the round. I imagine he'd get him out of there in, half a round. What else we got here? All Day, Everyday Boxing says, how can you say Jake Paul isn't bad for boxing? The integrity of the sport is paramount. I just think he'll come and go. And we've had people harm the integrity of the sport over the generations. 2 of the guys that we'll be talking about recently have seen a lot more of that than I have because they were around boxing their whole lives. But yeah, it's things move on quickly, in boxing. People don't now talk about, David Haye hobbling along for however many rounds against Tony Bellew so much. That was pretty ridiculous. Some of the early crossover fights as well, people don't really talk about that anymore. It's just become an accepted part of the sport. So I don't think it's going to cause the sport of boxing any long-term harm. Fezza says, smart move since Jake versus Canelo flopped. Big Boy Garm says, the fight is a joke. Fake Paul is terrible for boxing. He represents the path without stripes. Kids see hype beats hard work and graft. Yeah, see, that's the point I raised, that's the worrying part of Jake Paul's rise. Forget the ladder, just Rasmus has show lights and buy your way in. Lou Brown says Jake Paul couldn't even beat Tommy Fury. JB78 says, come on. It's not supposed to be like a pirate, like that hurts. AJ hasn't got a chin, it takes one punch. Not from a cruiserweight who hasn't really got technical skills, though, I don't think. Porter says, Jake Paul, Logan Paul, misfits have made boxing become a circus. People aren't taking it serious anymore. Even the missus rolls her eyes at these people boxing, in inverted commas. Spore Clay, AJ probably has enough to win a close split decision. Yimmy Yappy says, how is this a talking point buy? Well, thanks for posting, Yimmy Yappy, before you said goodbye. Big Chungus, is Danny in a dentist's waiting room? The dentist waiting room's the only things that are light coloured and have a radiator. They don't normally have sofas, do they? God, Big Chungus was nice to me for a whole one post, and he's turned on me. But yeah, so that's my view on it. We may well see it. If you haven't already, please do vote in the poll. We haven't asked you if you're going to watch Anthony Joshua versus Jake Paul if it happens. We've asked you, would you be willing to pay for it? So let us know in the poll, and we'll read out the results at the end of the show. But now, Ayman, maybe you can introduce segment 2, because there's a very, very sought-after heavyweight at the moment, it seems.
Yeah, the headline is Usyk, 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 and that is Alexander Usyk. Hopefully, I've done that chant justice. Everyone seems to want a slice of Alexander right now with the latest, and it'd be no surprise because he's been calling for the fight, as far as I remember, for a while. Another bite at the cherry with him. And I think it's a lot of it. The call is it's less about call outs in the way that we view call outs now with fights, and more out of a respect and want to push themselves. And everybody seems to love Alexander Usyk right now. And Derek Chisora is the latest fighter to put himself in. I guess if there's a hat for it, the hat for a fight with Alexander, who's set down a 2-fight plan left for him to retire and exit the sport. And one of them seems to be clear that it's going to be Daniel Dubois for a second undisputed heavyweight title clash in about a year or so. So, yeah, I mean, the prospect of Derek Chisora, who seemed to have struck up a real good friendship with Alexander Usyk, someone who a lot feel gave Alexander Usyk a real hard fight in his entry to the heavyweight division. I believe it was his second fight in the division, and has racked up a couple of impressive wins recently after a lot of people were worried about where he stood in the sport, and himself has put a deadline on where he and when he will call the curtain on his own career. So the prospect might be that we see Derek Chisora and Alexander Usyk rekindle. I wouldn't call it a rivalry now anymore, but a battle to show respect, maybe, as Derek Chisora wants to fight Alexander Usyk. I don't think personally we will get to see Usyk versus Chisora 2. He would kind of be a real good opponent with respect to Derek for a homecoming fight for Alexander. Now, he can't fight in the Ukraine at the moment, but as close as you can get to that would probably be in Poland. And Wrocław, Poland was a brilliant background to the fight with Daniel Dubois. I remember being there and covering it for SecondsOut, and it was a beautiful, beautiful location. And that in a fight with a homecoming, traditionally, it's a opponent you can beat or the heavy favorite in, and Chisora, with respect, would fit that bill. So it's not out of the realms of possibility, but I would contend that someone of Alexander Usyk's stature, ambition, desire would want to win the undisputed heavyweight title again, and then maybe look to drop down to cruiserweight and try to win a world title, or if the belts have been suitably collected by one fighter, then to challenge for undisputed at cruiserweight and then call it a career there. But the prospect is Chisora and Usyk 2, Usyk Chisora 2. Do you want to see it, Danny?
No, definitely not. I mean, I'll watch it, but only once I've got one of those dodgy sticks that everyone's been talking about in the chat. Yeah, I mean, it's a myth, isn't it? It's a myth that Chisora gave Alexander Usyk an incredibly tough fight. He didn't. He gave him a mildly tough 4 rounds, and then Usyk took over, and Chisora wasn't in the fight after that. You know, he took some time to get used to a big, strong heavyweight pursuing him. And once he got used to that, and it took a few rounds, maybe more than he expected, that was it. And Chisora, if anything, is probably slower now than he was then. And Usyk is more accustomed to the heavyweight division, having beaten the 2 best heavyweights apart from himself twice each. Yeah, I mean, that'd be a ridiculous last fight for Usyk. Being a dream last fight for Chisora, of course. And I like Derek. I've got no problem with him, you know, making loads of money and having a really celebrated last fight. But no, let's not waste an Usyk fight on that. I don't think anyone was calling for that rematch, were they, except for Chisora? So, no, not for me. I mean, I'd like to see Joseph Parker get the next shot, not just because he put out that promo video that everyone loves. What was it, Shania Twain?
Yeah,
Still the one. Yeah, I didn't mind that song back in the day. It was really good. I was saying this to my partner the other day. There's a really good documentary on Shania Twain. I'm not sure if it's on Netflix or one of the other platforms. Really interesting. And an Alanis Morissette one that's even better. But off that tangent, back into boxing. Yeah, I want to see Joseph Parker because I think I favoured him to beat Daniel Dubois in their cancelled clash. I think he's waited a long time. He's cleared up a lot of the supposed threats in the heavyweight division. I think he really deserves it. He's WBO interim champion. I know the WBO have called for that fight, but what is his name? Gustavo Oliveri, the WBO president. So used to it being Paco. I think it's Oliveri.
Yep.
He said recently that could be superseded by a unification fight, so an undisputed fight with Daniel Dubois. If that was requested, it would go to the championships committee and they would have the final say. So it's not necessarily Joseph Parker next. I think it should be, partly because he deserves it and partly because it was Dubois that pulled out of their fight, not Parker. So in my kind of what's fair view, I feel like he should be ahead of him now in the pecking order for that undisputed, but then it wouldn't be undisputed. That's the argument in Dubois' side. It wouldn't be an undisputed fight if it was Parker. It'd just be a defense from Usyk. And Usyk's made it clear that he himself wants Dubois next. I think personally that Parker has a better chance of beating Usyk than Dubois does. I think it was Buddy McGirt on our channel who said Parker is the only heavyweight out there who can beat Usyk. I'm not sure I'll go quite that far, but I do think he has a better chance than Dubois. I think Dubois has improved immensely in the 18 months since the first Usyk fight, as Frank Warren often says. But the flip side to that is I don't think he's improved enough in the areas he needs to beat Usyk. You know, he's got a lot more metal. He trusts his power more. He'll go into the trenches more. So that enabled him to knock out Joshua, for example. But against Usyk, unless Dubois' footwork's gone up to another level, and it's already pretty good, unless his hand speed's gone to another level, and it's already pretty good, and unless his boxing IQ and variety has gone to another level, I don't think he beats Usyk second time round, third time round, fourth time round. I think he's going to be someone who excels once Usyk retires in the same way that, Vitaly Klitschko excelled once Lennox Lewis retired. And everyone will then say, what a great win that was. Or Floyd Mayweather and Canelo, what a great win that was. Got him just the right time, etc., etc. But for me, no, I want to see Joseph Parker get the shot. Ayman, who do you want to see get the shot? And then we'll go to the chat.
I'm game for this Daniel Dubois fight with Alexander Usyk. I think Joe Parker and Daniel Dubois are the two fighters that you want to see in the opposite corner of Alexander Usyk. However, for me, the opportunity to get an undisputed heavyweight title fight again, I think makes me choose Dubois over Joe Parker. There is, of course, the thread of the history between the two of them, having been there, covering the show as well, too. That kind of makes it a little bit more of a want or a motivation to see that run back again, and the controversy of whether it was a low blow or not low blow. I get a feeling that Alexander Usyk, despite his confidence in knowing that it wasn't a low blow from his perspective, and I believe that having seen multiple angles now that it wasn't a low blow either, but he'll want to make sure that there's no doubts, no controversy, no reason for anyone to point the finger towards Alexander Usyk and say this is the means in which he defeated Daniel Dubois. He'll want to silence any critics and doubts, and he'll also want to silence any doubts that, look, if Daniel Dubois is the guy next up in this generation of heavyweights, and I know a lot of fighters will contest that it's Daniel Dubois and want to put themselves at that number one status. But if he's that guy, he's the guy then to notch up a victory and another against to really cement his legacy when he leaves the sport. So I get that a lot of people want to see Joe Parker in that fight. I do believe he's deserving of an opportunity at a fight against Alexander Usyk as well. That's the fight that people want to, or that's the fighter they want to test themselves against, but not over another undisputed bout, unfortunately. And hopefully Joe Parker can get that opportunity, but I'd rather see Daniel Dubois in there again.
Thunder Rose says, one day we will hear Danny say seconds out, segment 2, etc. when switching to a new topic. We kind of just did, although we're not switching to a new topic just yet. Cloud Strife says, can I just throw out there that I've watched Usyk Fury 1 like 10 times and have Fury winning on a split decision? What do you guys think now looking back? I haven't watched it again since the first time, but I had Usyk winning 7 rounds to 5. Ayman, what did you have?
Yeah, so just a very, very close fight, and I can't argue, or I will to the hilt. I will to this day, quote a seconds out quote there. I will to this day argue with any boxing fan or whatever that Gennady Golovkin beat Canelo Alvarez 2 of the 3 times. Of course, the third fight just wasn't a fight. But even though they're close fights, for me, they're solid Golovkin wins. But the fight between Alexander Usyk and Tyson Fury, the first time round, it's not a solid round win for either fighter in points in that fight, which lead me to believe that you can pick 115, 113 for either fighter. So if you picked Fury, fair play to it, or a draw if you picked it. Like, I'm not going to argue with it, but I had Alexander Usyk winning the first time round. I think I watched it again as well, and I might even have the draw the second time round. So if that's your opinion, fair enough.
Good stuff. Where are we? Sorry, I'm just going to scroll down so I can get to the rest of the chat. OG Slim says, I guess if JP, that's Joseph Parker, gets bounced around the canvas, then it'd be a decent watch, to be fair. Lou Brown says, no one can beat Usyk. Where are we? A lot of people still talking about our headline topic, Jake Paul against Anthony Joshua. Let us know if you would pay to watch it. It's in the poll. Big Chungus says, I'd like to see Parker versus Usyk, to be fair. It's another name on Usyk's record to cement his legacy at heavyweight. And Parker is looking good. Could be an entertaining fight. Jack Dutton on the 45, welcome. He says, I fancy Dubois against Usyk, especially if he really goes after that body. And then Big Chungus goes on. That being said, if Dubois beats Parker, I think a fight for Undisputed makes sense. Lou Brown, I know that's another Jake Paul comment. So we did speak about Jake Paul potentially fighting Anthony Joshua in the first segment. So please do vote in our poll if you haven't already. Yeah, Eamon, I think what's more likely to happen is that Usyk fights Dubois next. I think it's what they both want. It seems to be what Turki Al-Sheikh and Frank Warren want, which may be even more important. And Parker then is guaranteed a shot at Undisputed rather than at 3 belts against the winner. Unless the winner decides to vacate the WBO belt. So it'd be nice if there was something in place to say they're not allowed to do that. They have to accommodate Parker. But I'm not sure that's for the various promoters to negotiate things like that. But yeah, so just for me, I think Usyk beats Dubois. Competitive early and then pulls away, pretty much like the first fight, except without the controversy. And maybe Dubois goes to points this time rather than get stopped. And then Usyk Parker. Usyk's, another year older. I know so is Parker, but Parker's been on a really good run of form. Only beaten by Usyk himself, and Usyk's been less active recently. That's a really tough fight to call, and one I'd like to see. And if it's going to be Usyk's final fight, I think it'd be a really interesting one as well. But Parker will be very much in the mix when Usyk retires, regardless of what happens if they fight. So, yeah, Daniel Dubois wants to be it, and he's younger than a lot of the heavyweights out there in the top 10 at the moment. But don't rule Parker out. He seems reborn in the last couple of years. So we shall wait and see. Just quickly before we go on to segment 3, I will say it the way what's his name wants me to say it. But yeah, Eamon, we haven't got this on the schedule. So just as we're talking heavyweights, just a quick related question. What do you make of Philip Hrgovic coming in as Joe Joyce's replacement opponent?
Don't like it, Danny. I genuinely don't like it. I think the fight, a lot of people, when I've been discussing this fight with colleagues and people, friends who are interested in boxing, who like Joe Joyce as a fighter, saw his climb up as well and bought into the whole juggernaut type of persona. The fight with White, and for me, seemed to be an exciting fight, and one that Joe's taken quite a few big shots in recent fights and been on the end of some brutal knockouts, or the big one against Zhile Zhang. The way he kind of fought against Chisora, when a lot of people thought that Chisora wouldn't get the victory, and be there for Joyce to get the win, and he got knocked down in that fight, and he came in for a shot and then just sort of almost like just completely lost balance and fell down out of no punch coming his way. It just was all a little bit concerning. And even that pulled together, I still thought he was in with a real good shot to beat Dylan White, who hasn't pulled up any trees himself, who didn't look great against Ebenezer Tete over in Gibraltar. I thought that Joyce could win that fight and probably would win that fight for my books. I thought that was the sort of level he should contend at to prove people like me, I guess, wrong that Joyce at the higher level would struggle. I find Joyce to be a very entertaining fighter, and I think it's lost on some people just how entertaining he was and the amount that he puts and gives away. Of course, we should be saying that he's got to tighten his defenses, but in that is a very exciting fighter who gives a lot to the fans in his style. And when White pulled out with the injury, I was imagining that there would be a similar sort of level opponent, and they found Filip Hrgovic as the opponent. And Hrgovic it depends who you speak to, because I've heard a lot of people say that Hrgovic is the boogeyman. Before, Martin Bakole was the boogeyman. He was on his way to win the world titles. Of course, promoters were saying
There's
that.
only one boogeyman, Ayman.
Say again?
There's only one boogeyman.
Yeah, that's right. Billy Nelson will give me a rap on the knuckles for that one. But then you speak to other people and they say that Hrgovic hasn't really been tested. He's just been fed and he's not really the fighter that he's been painted out to be. I was there in attendance for Hrgovic versus Zhang. I thought Zhang won that fight, but it was by no means like a real clear win, and Hrgovic was fighting in there after losing his father, and you can understand as to why that might have been not the full version of Filip Hrgovic. That being said, he puts his punches well together. He's like Joyce in a way where he doesn't really whack in a huge big shot. He's kind of got a thudding type of rhythm and tempo and force to him, but he does have those big punches every now and again. And Joyce hasn't shown that he's blocking them. He's just taking them. And that's the concern there, because he's sort of like an equal height of good power, still fresh. He's had the loss to Daniel Dubois, but even then, that loss against Daniel Dubois, he was taking Daniel Dubois' best, and the fight was stopped on cuts, wasn't it? So Hrgovic wanted to continue, but for a couple of cuts, and it was cuts that hampered him pre the fight, because I think a cut opened, from what I'd been told, a week or so before, but they still took the fight because it was good money and the opportunity for a world title after the fact. So you're talking about someone who's just been beaten by someone who's now going into what we believe to be a second fight with Alexander Usyk, an undisputed heavyweight title fight. So and although he's been out for a year, how much is ring rust really going to play into a factor for Filip Hrgovic against what I feel is an opponent who's I don't see a good outcome in this fight. I don't see this being anywhere close to as good of a matchmaker of a fight as Dylan White was for Joe Joyce. I think the odds are stacked against against Joe Joyce. So I'm not really looking forward to that fight. I guess they've thought here, like, look, if we're going to rebuild or get Joyce back to the top, we need a springboard. So we're going to roll the dice a little bit here and try to jump up as far as we can with a big win against Hrgovic. But he's got to get that win. It's a tough task.
Yeah, completely agree with all of those points there, Ayman. Porter says, it's sad what happened to Joe Joyce. He beat Dubois, smashed Parker and put on the sidelines. The Zhang fights were the wrong choice. Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of bad matchmaking decisions, that's right up there, fighting Zhilei Zhang. And I think it's fair to say as well that a lot of people did say that before the first fight as well. It's not, everyone being smart in hindsight. Paul says, how come Caballero isn't getting any mention at any shots? Well, he's WBC interim champion now, isn't he? So he will be somewhere along that mandatory roulette wheel, or maybe not roulette wheel. What's the rotation? Mandatory rotation when it's the WBC's turn. October Red said, but he could end up knocking him out. I'm not sure which conversation you're referring to there, Red, but thanks for joining us. Maybe Jake Paul, I hope not. Lord Zed is having an argument with Lou Browns. Just let them crack on. But now to do it the way Thunder Road wants us to. Seconds Out, segment 3. And we lost two or three, actually, major figures in boxing over the weekend. One of them who we won't be talking about in depth, I guess, because maybe he was, I'm not going to say because he was before our time, because so was George Foreman, but Livingston Bramble, very exciting style of a former world champion. Maybe not as much is known about him, talked about him, particularly in the UK where we are. But obviously, we send our condolences to everyone who knew him. But George Foreman passed away on Friday, I believe, at the age of 76. And my partner told me about it on Saturday morning. She'd seen it on social media, and I was not shocked because I guess whenever you get to that age, you're not gonna have long necessarily. Sorry if anyone out there is 75 currently watching this. And then, not too long after that, as I mentioned earlier, I was asked by LBC. I think originally they tried to find the SecondsOut owner, and he's away at the moment. And I was kind of the next call. And I went on there to talk about George Foreman's legacy and so on. And obviously I knew the big bits that everyone else knows. I had to read up on a lot more just in case, they stumped me with any questions. But George Foreman packed so much into his 76 years. It's incredibly impressive. And I'm envious of it because I haven't even come close to half of it yet. And I'm obviously older than half his age when he passed. He won an Olympic gold medal, having already turned his life around from being a petty criminal as a teenager. He won the gold medal. I think he'd only had 26 fights amateur at the point when he'd won the gold medal in Mexico City in 1968. So that in itself is a huge achievement for anyone. But he wasn't done there. He then went pro. And there was like two different generations of George Foreman. So the one that first went pro was knocking everyone out, surly, bad-tempered persona. He was the one who destroyed Joe Frazier to win the world heavyweight title, and then famously had that war, the rumble in the jungle, Kinshasa, what was then Zaire, now the Congo, against Muhammad Ali. And it's where we saw the infamous debut of Ali's rope-a-dope style, which proved too much for Foreman in the heat and the gradually increasing exhaustion that he felt. But the flip side of that, and I said this, I think, on LBC, was that I was so glad that Foreman came back because obviously after the Ali loss, he had a few, won some, lost some, and eventually decided to retire and become an ordained minister and spread the word of God that way. But what really made me happy about his comeback was the fact that if he hadn't come back, and we'll talk about what happened after the 10 years out of the sport in a minute, he would have always been remembered as the loser as one of the greatest fights in history. And obviously there's no shame there. He's lost to an absolute legend in a huge spectacle. But that would have been the key point that people would raise whenever George Foreman's name was mentioned. But he wasn't done yet, far from it. He came back. He had a couple of world title shots at heavyweight once he built his way back up. And his main reason for coming back was that he thought his prominence as a boxer and he would be able to spread the word of God, which was incredibly important to him and remained so until his passing. So he lost, I think, who was it? He lost to Evander Holyfield first and then Tommy Morrison. And I think people were calling for him to make his second retirement, although he never officially retired the first time, I should say. And he bumped into Michael Moorer. And obviously there was loads of clips going around of the ending of this fight, or the highlights as well on social media over the last couple of days, as you would expect. And he looked, Foreman, so incredibly slow in comparison to Moorer, who was a tricky southpaw, Kronk Jim, very, very talented, outboxed Foreman for most of it. And then it got to round 10. And George landed what looked like a pretty innocuous right hand, which put Moorer back onto his heels, and then followed up with a really short right hand to follow, a clubbing blow, I think it's how it's usually described, and just completely finished Moorer. Just one of the most memorable knockouts in heavyweight history. And it made Foreman a record breaker. It made him the oldest man to win the world heavyweight title, the oldest holder of the world heavyweight title a year later. And it kind of fizzled out after that, but he'd already secured his place in history, not once, but twice. I mean, imagine even doing it once. So that was incredibly impressive. And then if all that wasn't enough, he continued to spread the word of the Lord after his retirement. he went on to be a really respected color commentator as well. I think that was on HBO. And perhaps most famously of all, and crossing over from the boxing sphere, he put his name to the George Foreman grill, the was it lean, mean grilling machine, which I haven't got one, I've got to say, although I have been in shared houses before where someone's had one. I don't know if they're any good or not, but it doesn't really matter. He made, I think it was $138 million from selling the commercial rights. So even right up until the end of, his life, he was still achieving, he was still breaking new ground. I think there's a lesson there for everyone. I feel like I've talked for absolutely ages, but Ayman, what's your view on George Foreman and his passing? What are your memories of him?
No, I mean, Danny, you basically said as good as I could probably give, or actually a lot better than I could probably give on Foreman's passing. I think, a little bit more difficult for myself, having George would obviously have been more of a figure outside of my time in boxing, and I don't think I was even born when, using the Josh Hart excuse here, when Foreman was in his pump or had obviously retired from the sport as well too. But I mean, George always come across as a really kind of lovable, affable type of character, and I think the best way to kind of describe with George is a lot of fighters try to emulate styles in boxing, and with heavyweight boxing, a lot of fighters, they want to be renowned as Ali, and they'll try some of the Ali tricks, and some of them will try and come in as like Mike Tyson and get down low and look for the knockouts and roll forward and try to have that aggressive sort of style. But no one's really got close to emulating what George Foreman brought to the ring, both in terms of his stature, physical prowess, the punch power, the resistance that he had. It's all a package that I think is completely unique. And although he won't be revered as high as maybe Ali will be revered, he's still revered and feared and respected for what he achieved and the skill set he brought in the ring, because of just how much of a, I think these days we call him like a natural freak. He was in terms of just a genetic sportsman. So he was able to really kind of harness that, and that's what took him, I think, to winning a world title in his elder years. And that's a record that still stands to this day, and it's a record that people want to break. I think Klitschko wants to come back and break it, and we'll see how tough that is to break, because it's a young pond you're swimming in now, and George was able to do it, like I said, because of his natural gifts. And I think we'll see the same. I think we'll see the record still stand, because it's such a difficult task to achieve, and that's what won't be emulated. That style won't be emulated. I feel he's completely unique in that sort of way. And he was, I think, in his later years, I sort of half said, and I said it to Wally, it seemed like to me you didn't really see him too much in amongst the boxing events. He was doing commentary, I think, for a while. Yeah, he enjoyed that. He excelled at that. And then I think in the interview that we'd posted during the tribute video to George Foreman, he said that, look, it was boxing was my job. I enjoyed the commentary, but then the commentary was becoming my job. So I much prefer doing promotion because it doesn't feel like the job. So he moved into doing some promotion. But then after that, I think he really kind of bedded into his life outside of boxing. Maybe you could go as far to say like shed that boxing skin and wanted to embrace that religious and pastoral life that he was leading back home and locally. So you didn't see him too much at events, but look, I think he remembered for his brilliant achievements, which will take some beating or take some emulating, and then for his just gentle nature in amongst being such a giant in this sport.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. October Red says RIP. Big Chunga says, really does suck losing one of the last golden era heavyweight titans. George was bigger than boxing. May he rest in peace. Craig the Monkman says, Big George is most definitely a legend of the sport. Porter says they all had wars in the ring and it took its toll. Ali, Frazier and Foreman. Halusi Ozdemir says he's gone back to Joyce. I think we'll probably leave that one for now. MB says, I know I shouldn't, but I've always questioned that punch on Michael Moorer. Yeah, because it looked fairly innocuous, even the finishing punch, and he kind of toppled over like a wardrobe. But I don't see any reason why, that'd still be the case, and he wouldn't have come out and said a different story behind it by now if it were true. So I'm going to go with it. Jack Dutton on the 45 says, Moorer was knocked out. Didn't you see the blood pouring from his nose? There you go. DB Cooper 1 says, for fuck's sake, little lads. I'm not sure what that's all about. But RIP to George and Colin Hart, 2 incredible lives that were well lived. Love Steve Bunce's BBC 5 final podcast with Hart. What a bloke. Just keep going down the chat. Zambani Love says he's broke his leg. I think he's talking about AJ there. Big Chungus says eating my toasted sandwiches will never feel the same. Very good. Where are we? October Red says made more money off the grill than he ever did in boxing. Oh yeah, like much more. Beautiful Golden Dragon says heard Ayman's take already on the asylum. Save some for this, mate. Porter says Ali said Foreman was the strongest guy he fought. And Lord Zed and Porter are just arguing with each other, apparently. John Wick says, Josh Kelly get back to you yet, Danny? Boy. Yes, he did. Did I not say this last week? Ayman did? Oh, no, it was 2 weeks ago, wasn't it?
Yeah, you weren't here last week.
Oh, yeah. Well, he did. He did get back to me the same day as well. Hold on a minute, and I'll tell you exactly what he said. Josh Kelly.
There you go. This is truly interactive. You guys asked for the information on Josh Kelly, and Danny's got it for you. Go on.
There's the phones. I'm not making it up. Mm-hmm. He said, didn't even realise you sent this, mate. Just seen your interview in Instagram, because we put a clip of it on there from the live. I've been off my WhatsApp for about, and he didn't finish that sentence, just says for about. Hope you're well, mate. You're spelled incorrectly, but we'll let him off. And get an interview in soon. And then he's done a soon, what do you call it? A soon emoji or whatever as well, in case I didn't know what the word soon meant. It's got a little arrow on it. So yeah, there you go. For everyone, all the people out there that were asking about Josh Kelly, now you know. Halusi Ozdemir says no boxer did what Foreman did to Frazier in those 2 fights. October Red says she likes Josh Kelly and needs more activity from him, needs more phone activity from him. And yeah, Porter and Lord Zed are just cracking on. So that was the sad passing of George Foreman. And we, again, send our condolences to everyone who knew him, fans of his as well. But yeah, he passed on the Friday, and I believe on the Saturday, after a long and tough, grueling battle with pancreatic cancer. Legendary boxing journalist, Hall of Fame alumni, Colin Hart, someone I knew fairly well, not as well as others, but still fairly well. Lost that battle, ultimately, just weeks before his 90th birthday, I believe. I'm sure he won't mind me saying this, but his colleague at the Sun newspaper, Wally Downs Jr., great friend of the channel, had been, knowing that Colin probably didn't have that long left, had been going round to various outlets and journalists that he knew, trying to get some Colin Hart, memories and stories from people within the boxing industry. And although we were really on board with it, it just never came around that we interviewed the right people at the right time, that we could get any of those, which is bad on us, let's be honest. But the fact that Wally made that effort in Colin's final weeks and days, I think that needs to be commemorated. I think that needs to be celebrated. Also, just on that note, I suggested to Ayman a few weeks ago that he do his unscripted series with Joe Gallagher, who was recently, of course, diagnosed with liver and bowel cancer. And Ayman was bang on it straight away, but Joe was away at the time in Dubai, I think, or Saudi. Yeah. And Ayman's next suggestion was Colin Hart. And I said, yeah, can do, or something along those lines, like positive but non-committal. And in hindsight, I really wish I would have said, yeah, get him now. I mean, I didn't know at the time that he was in such dire straits, and it would have been great to get, an interview with him. What a life in boxing before that happened. But I know, Ayman, you spoke to Wally Downs Jr. today about the passing of Colin Hart, amongst other things. So maybe you should start this one off just with your own memories of Colin and just some of the stuff that Wally spoke to you about.
Yeah, just quickly on the outset, I'd like to say, having heard from Wally about Colin's ill health, um, I'd kind of ummed and ahed a little bit as to whether to ring Colin and just check in on him. I didn't know what state he was in. I did eventually ring the number, and I was answered. The phone was answered by a relative. I believe it's his wife, Cindy Hart, who answered the phone and let me know the situation he was in. Because myself and another reporter in the scene, John Nagyaff, kind of wanted to see if we could maybe go see him at least. That wasn't possible. He wasn't in a fit state, unfortunately, to go see him. But what Cindy did say was, if you wanted to send in messages of just to let, I guess, the family know about interactions you've had with Colin, your memories of Colin, and the like, you can do. And she offered me the email to send that to, because that would be a lot of comfort to her and the rest of the family. So if anyone does have, who's listening here, who does have memories, wants to share them with the family, please do get in touch with me via social media. I'll happily pass on the email to you, and you can share your stories with them. I'm sure they'll greatly
Why
appreciate
don't
it.
you bang the email in the chat?
I don't know whether to do that, Danny, just because um, I don't know. I don't know whether to do that.
You don't have to, but it's just
Yeah,
if otherwise you're going to be fielding a lot of people probably.
I'm happy to field them. Just no disrespect to anyone in the chat, but I would like a little bit of a buffer, just
Maybe
in
some
case
respect
some
to
people, you know
someone.
what this people are like this day and age. No disrespect to anyone in the chat meant. But if you would like to, just drop me a message via social media. But yeah, no. Outside of that, like I mentioned there, the thing was, uh, there's it's actually a little bit. I'm glad it's we've got recorded by one of these videographers. Louis Theroux did was it a documentary? It was on Anti Joshua. Did a piece on Anti Joshua, and it was
Yeah.
during his Jermaine Franklin fight. And there's for some reason they clipped to me interviewing Colin. Maybe they got a bit with Colin and they needed a little bit of B-roll, but they clipped to me interviewing Colin. I'm glad they got that little bit. But Colin was someone that me and other journalists would always look to grab at events, and it's not about views. It was more about Colin's just no nonsense take on everything in boxing. He was so experienced. He'd seen so many fighters come and go, promoters come and go, and he just had he had a brilliant view on things. He was sharp as anything, and he pulled no punches. There's videos on him and IFL in confrontation with, not quite confrontation, but in a back and forth with John Fury, and you wouldn't see too many squaring up to John Fury these days on subjects. But like I mentioned there, myself and it would be John Nagyoff would always kind of see Colin and be like, all right, let's go grab Colin, and we maybe bother him. He was probably enjoying the fights. The last fight I think he was at that we saw him at was Joyce versus Chisora, and he was always lovely and accommodating. And we just said to Colin, can we come grab you? And he was like, oh, you want me now? I was like, of course, yeah, we want you now. So we grabbed him, walked him around the back, and we would just speak to him about boxing. And John would do this thing where he'd ask him about fights he'd covered in the past. So if anyone wants to see those, do check those out. But as well, we've got a number of interviews with Colin from his time in boxing as well, too, because I made a thing to go speak to him. But he's just that experience you can't buy. That kind of his integrity you couldn't buy, and the impact isn't just from losing Colin from the scene. It's also, I remember, and tying in both Joe Galler and Colin Hart. Joe had said to me about a year back that none of these reporters and journalists in the scene come to gyms and come to get to know the fighters and come to see him in sparring and camps like they used to, like the old school. And I remember him dropping the name Colin Hart. And from that point, I made a thing to try and get amongst the gyms more and try and get into see fighters and go to gyms and get to know fighters a little bit more to be that old school type of reporter in the scene, because that seems to be lost in this day and age. The feeling is from a few people or more than a few people in the industry. So that's the impact it's left on myself, as well as Wally kind of commemorating more. Wally said to me in the interview that Colin wouldn't want people to wallow and pity. He would want people to celebrate and then move forward with reporting of boxing. But he was someone who Wally said transcended British boxing journalism and became part of the fabric of British boxing, which is what people, the likes of Frank Bruno, Lennox Lewis, and others, Ricky Hatton, were saying about him. One of the few that could do that, and something to aspire to in the future for sure. He will be missed, and I'm sure Colin can have some great conversations with the likes of Ali, Foreman, and more up there. So rest in peace to Colin Hart.
Yeah, I mean, you said about it being a lost art of reporters going around to the gyms, and I think with the advent or the rise of YouTube boxing journalism, I think that's been a byproduct of that. I think what I would say is that the best ones, the ones that end up getting promoted and going places, they're the ones that do go around to the gyms. And they're fewer than they've ever been, but that kind of marks them out as the ones who have got the promise to go further. Also on that, I'd say trainers are a lot more protective of their stables and the sparring and so on than they ever used to be when Colin started out. You know, they used to have kind of workouts on such a regular basis, like every week in London or the major cities in the UK. And this isn't in my day, this is more in Colin's day. There were workouts that you could go and watch just with one fighter, but it'd be a really prominent fighter. And then you could ask them questions afterwards and speak to the trainer and speak to the manager, you know, writing it all in your little notepad and so on. So I think that's changed as well. I certainly used to go around a lot of gyms when I was on Boxing News. I used to be at a different gym at least once a week because you can interview so many people in one go because they're all there training maybe at different times. But if you spend a whole day there, and I always found the trainers and the managers and people like that to be the most interesting people. But yeah, moving on from that, we talked about Colin there and his relationship with Wally Downs Jr. and some others. There was also Frank Warren, who worked with Colin and was a huge fan / patron of Colin throughout his career, particularly in the latter stage. Obviously, Warren probably wasn't even born when Colin, well, no, he would have been born, but wasn't into boxing when Colin started out. And right up until the end, you know, Colin was getting amazing kind of hotel suites and the best seats in the house for the biggest shows, even once Riyadh season began. And that's just a measure of the respect that Warren has, not just for print boxing media in general, but for Colin specifically. You know, the amount of media lunches, I know Ayman's been to one, I've been to a few now, where all the old heads are there. And you go along as a YouTube journalist. Now, obviously, I've done both. I was a print journalist on Boxing News, but for the most part, you go as a YouTube journalist. You just want to get you one video. And a lot of YouTubers probably aren't even that bothered about staying for the meal. But that's where you pick up the best boxing knowledge and the stories is between the interviews. You know, Frank's had a bit too much to drink. Some of the journalists have as well. Spoiler alert. And you find out so much more because you get the benefit of everyone's experience instead of just one person's or two if Frank brings a boxer along. I remember Daniel Devois showed up at one of the media lunches in a really smart restaurant once wearing a tracksuit. That was pretty funny. But Colin was always there. And as Ayman alluded to, he was always accessible when you wanted to interview him. He was almost surprised, like Ayman said there, oh, you want me now? Yeah. Because he was so humble and modest, even though he'd lived a life in boxing journalism that the likes of me, Ayman, anyone who's around in this generation, or sorry, don't mean to insult you, Ayman, you're a younger generation, but we could only dream of. You know, it did very much feel when I started in this industry as kind of the golden age is over. Not that I want to bring everyone down even more than talking about two people who've died, but you know, I went on trips abroad for Boxing News to America and other places, and there'd always be a few national journalists there. Jeff Powell talking about how he owns a ranch in Texas, and, you know, Colin Hart talking about all the champagne receptions he's been to in his years covering the sport, and being at Ali Foreman, which we just talked about, and having an argument with George Foreman at one point because he didn't mind his P's and Q's around Colin Hart. But just, yeah, complete modesty. And I think with the rise of YouTube boxing journalism, it made even more of a star, if you like, out of Gareth A. Davis, for example, who's very good at what he does. No shade to him. But I think because he became the kind of ever-present face of print boxing journalism on YouTube, the guys like Ron Lewis, Jeff Powell, and Colin Hart got disregarded to an extent. So I think it's good that not just Seconds Out, but lots of outlets were able to kind of bring them back to the fore, because there's so much knowledge there, and we've got to look after these people and get them on camera more often, because otherwise that knowledge gets lost. It doesn't get passed down through the generations.
Yep.
We lost Ron Lewis far too young. And I've got to say I was, closer to him than I was to Colin, but maybe because we were more of a similar age. But the ones that are still out there now, the likes of Jeff Powell and some of the other veteran reporters out there, Alan Hubbard, Richard Hubbard, and there's probably many more I haven't even thought about. Steve Lillis isn't quite that age bracket. I know he still works in boxing, not so much on the print side now. But we just need to safeguard them and bring them to the fore as much as we possibly can so that that knowledge doesn't get lost. But yeah, rest in peace, of course, to Colin Hart. Condolences to Cindy and his 2 kids and all his grandkids. And yeah, we won't see another like him, I think it's fair to say. Just going back to the chat before we round off. Where are we? David Hyde says, I reckon that if the Ali Foreman fight had taken place in the USA instead of Congo, Foreman would have eventually knocked Ali out. Our Henry Cooper, that is, showed that, and Foreman was one of, if not the biggest puncher I've seen. Porter, going back to the Josh Kelly conversation, says he went inactive when he went to Channel 5 and the Sourlands. He's a good boxer as well. October Red agrees with Porter. Where are we? Porter and Lord Zed still arguing. Jack Dutton on the 45 says AJ would do to Jake Paul what he did to Ngannou. Yeah, that's pretty much what I said. Just scroll down a bit more. Femi's Little Dark Room. Hold on, where's that? Femi's Little Dark Room. I would pay 25 euros, pounds, or US dollars for Jake Paul versus AJ. He didn't even give Jake Paul the first name rights in this. October Red says, that's why I love going to the gyms. It's their kitchen. Paul says, RIP Colin Hart. And it's probably because of clickbait now. Words and statements get twisted. Yeah, I mean, I imagine if it was a print journalist offering to come down to the gym, they'd be given a bit more patience and a bit more access because of the reputation that, I'd say the negative few or the unscrupulous few have given to YouTube boxing journalism in general. David High says, Colin Hart was the voice of boxing practically my whole life. October Red says, because he earned it. It's networking too. Thunder Road says, I've heard English people refer to others pejoratively as a Wally. Did I spell it correctly, or is it spelled differently from Wally Downs Jr.? No, you're right. I mean, it's a common name / nickname, but it's also used pejoratively as, a bit of an idiot sometimes, you Wally. I think that was more in the 80s, though. I think that's kind of fallen out of fashion a bit now. I think Rodney Trotter was often called a Wally by Del Boy in Only Fools and Horses. And a Pillock, another one that's fallen out of fashion. I'm not sure Pillock ever got much further than the UK either. Thunder Road says, I wonder how much alcohol it would take for Fisheye Frank to blabber about who shot him. I mean, I asked him straight out once. He said he knows who it is, and he kind of described what they were like personality-wise, but he wouldn't tell me the name. Thunder Road says, that knowledge is now Spencer Fearon, unfortunately. Don't knock Spencer Fearon. I mean, just because great men have passed doesn't mean we need to belittle people who still remain in their stead. Spencer has got his own kind of niche that he's very good at, and plenty of respect for him. But yeah, I mean, there are still people out there with a huge amount of boxing knowledge that we can tap into. Not just Jeff Powell, some of the print journalists I've mentioned, Claude Abrams, who used to be the editor of Boxing News during most of my time there. He's incredibly smart and still relatively young as well. I'm sure he could be doing a lot more. Maybe he doesn't want to. But if he does, he's a voice that could be more prominent. And there's loads out there. I'm sure Ayman can add to that list perhaps in a minute. But who else we got here? No, Lord Zed and Porter still arguing, so we'll leave that to one side. Ayman, who have I missed?
Yeah, just to add that, I remember, Danny, we had a conversation. It must have been more than a year ago about who we should look to interview more, because I think we, just to put it kind of plainly, we discussed about how there's a lot of not naming names or linking them to names that are being suggested here. That's Danny's fielded that already, but there is a lot of guff that goes on in the boxing sphere, and a lot of people saying a lot of not a lot, basically, in their words. And we kind of identified people that we thought would be good to hear more of, for more of a reasoned, critical analysis on the sport without any real agenda or bias towards anyone. And sometimes that might often bleed into being a bit more critical, and less kind of praise sometimes. But that's just the way, and a bit of balance for sometimes a lot of kind of just jumping on board bandwagons, as it seems to be sometimes in the sport. And one of those names, not a journalist, but one I've really enjoyed speaking to and really enjoyed their takes and no nonsense takes to it, is someone who's claimed a number of titles and divisions, and Duke McKenzie, MBE. And when Duke came in, I've been waiting to see Duke at an event for a long time, and I saw him. It was at, gosh, I can't remember the fight now. It might even have been Joyce versus Chisora again, but I saw him working for Talksport. And I went straight to Duke and I said, Duke, love to meet you. I'm Ayman from SecondsOut. Been wanting to interview for a long time now. Would you be able to speak? And he said, I can't do it for Talksport Champ, but take my number and we can discuss. And from there, I've managed to have a number of real good chats with Duke McKenzie. I've since seen him. I'm not taking credit for it, but I like to see it because, like I said there, once you get people start hearing things, they want to hear more of it. And you now see Duke on a number of other YouTube outlets giving his opinion and take, and that sort of spreads, and you get less of the bias and more of a non-nonsense type of take. Trying to do the same sort of thing with Jeff Powell. Jeff, you'll see at the events, Jeff isn't as tech savvy as maybe Duke is. I've got a response from Jeff actually today, said to check in with him tomorrow, so hopefully I can get Jeff on again, maybe a little bit less of a close-up camera view as I did last time. But these are the type of people who I think it's key to, in amongst, like I mentioned there, a lot of the biases and bandwagon jumping, you've got to have the other side of it. And promoters might not like it, people in the industry might not like it, but I think it's needed. Thomas Hauser as well too. Again, Thomas doesn't has a few enemies, I guess. I don't mean that in the fullness sense of the word, but people that maybe he rubs up the wrong way. But it's good to get the critical eye sometimes on the sport, and if that ruffles a few feathers, then it does. But those are the type of people that myself and Danny had identified as wanting to have those conversations, because I think they're interesting within the sphere and provide that extra bit of balance. So hopefully we'll get more. And although we've lost Colin now, I'm sure other people can fill that spot as well too, while still honoring what Colin brought as well. So hopefully we can have those type of interviews more so going forward as well.
I used to work for a little while with Duke McKenzie and John Rawlin for ITV, and yeah, lovely man. And with some great insights into the sport, as you would expect for someone who's achieved all he has. Thunder Road says Chris Eubank Sr. would be a good listen, but he'd probably require a payment for an interview. Perhaps, and God forbid you cough during the interview. That's all I'm going to say. Porter says there needs to be more long-length sit-down interviews with the boxers. Don't get as many these days. 4 to 5 years ago, most videos were 25 to 30-minute sit-downs. I mean, that is what we're trying to recreate with Ayman's unscripted series. It's obviously not as easy to pin someone down for that long in their home or gym as it is to get someone on Zoom. But we are trying to do more of it. Obviously, Joe Gallagher's only just come out. We will be doing some more of those going forward. And Big Chungus says, Ayman, the conqueror of truth, which is possibly worse than the nickname he gave me earlier. But yeah, it sounds more like a Riyadh season event or a Ring Magazine event, doesn't it? Eubank versus Ben, sponsored by Ayman, Conqueror of Truth.
Terrible.
We'll look forward to that at the end of April. Really want to thank you all for tuning in. But before we let you go, we will reveal the results of the poll. We asked you in the first segment, will you pay to watch Jake Paul against Anthony Joshua if it happens? See, I've given him first name terms now as well. If it happens, not will you watch it, will you be willing to pay to watch it? 68% no, which isn't too surprising. Ayman, would you pay to watch it?
I don't think people are being truthful there, to be honest with you. I think come on, like if you're thinking that Jake Paul is this bad, terrible figure within boxing, and he's up against Anthony Joshua, you're tuning in to see him get knocked out, aren't you? That's what you want to see. That's the social justice or whatever that you want to see from it. So I think a lot of those no's turn into yeses come fight week. And I'm a certain yes straight from the go. So I think people aren't being quite as honest as maybe they would be if this fight was tomorrow night.
Good stuff. Well, I want to thank you all for tuning in. Please, if you haven't already, give us a like and or a subscribe. If you're watching this on playback, please do submit your comments and questions. We will still respond to some of those, even though it's not live. But yeah, as is usually the custom, the final word goes to Mr. Ayman Khan.
Yeah, look, a quieter week than maybe we'd be expecting. What with, I guess, if you don't like Jake Paul, you wouldn't like KSI. But I guess for some of you, you'd be happy and rejoicing that that fight is off. But we still have Josh Hart in the scene covering Pat Brown's debut in Altrincham, just a little bit on the outskirts of Manchester on the Eddie Hearn Matchroom Boxing Next Gen card. So look forward to seeing interviews from that fight week from our young budding reporter Josh Hart, and of course Seconds Out across the platforms, YouTube and further. We'll be keeping you abreast of all the latest news developments in the boxing sphere, so do keep tuned to Seconds Out for that. If you haven't already, click the like button, subscribe as well too, and you can leave a comment afterwards. Danny has been making a thing to respond to those. I should be doing a little bit more of that as well too, but we'll make the effort.
Otherwise it's me doing it. That's not a good idea.
Yeah. Otherwise, but we do get to your responses, and you've seen today the fruition of the interaction. You guys asked in the chat, "What is Josh Kelly doing?" Danny delivered by asking the question to Josh Kelly, and you've got the answer as well. The most interactive online podcast in the boxing sphere. If that doesn't get a like and subscribe and your support, I do not know what will. Regardless, we'll be here next week to bring you the reaction to fights and news on Seconds Out Live on Monday. But for now, that's the close of this episode. Thank you to everyone who joined in. Thank you to Vinny as well behind the scenes, and we'll see you guys on the next one.